My name is Noel Ferris, and I'm 33 years old. On Mother's Day, my mother held the card I'd spent 2 weeks making, walked it over the kitchen trash can, and let go of it while 11 people watched. My sister had just handed her a diamond necklace. My mother looked at what I'd made her, then looked at me, and said the best gift I could give her would be to disappear from this family. Then she told me to leave before I ruined the mood, so I left. I was halfway down Willowmere Lane when a long black car pulled up behind me and stopped. The woman who stepped out was 84 years old and leaned on a cane. When she said a name I had never heard in my life, my mother went down on the porch steps like somebody had knocked her legs out from under her. That was May. What I found 4 weeks later, buried in a client's box of old letters, was worse. And what I did with it in September is the part my family still can't talk about. If you've ever been the one who made the gift instead of buying it, stay with me. The house on Willowmere Lane uses cloth napkins on a Sunday. That's the first thing you need to know about my mother, Kareen. Honestly, it might be the only thing you need. I parked on the street instead of the driveway and kept my keys in my coat pocket, because I've been coming to these dinners for 33 years, and I know how to leave a room fast if I have to. I'd only planned on staying 90 minutes. I came at all because my niece, Wren, who's 9, had mailed me an invitation in purple marker with the stamp on upside down. Inside, my sister Renee had already set the table with name cards. Her husband Derek was carving ham and talking about a distributor conference. At 2 o'clock exactly, because my mother runs a holiday like a church service, Renee set a long flat box in front of her, and the room made the sound rooms make. It was from Halloway's, the jeweler downtown. The necklace inside had a stone you could see from the doorway. My mother put it on, turned her chin toward the light and said the price out loud twice, the way other people say grace. $11,000. I make books for a living, so I made her a book. 4 folded sheets sewn with waxed linen thread, the cover marbled by hand in my kitchen sink, blue over cream, because blue is the only color she's ever said she liked. Inside I'd tucked a photograph I'd found the winter before in my late father's old coffee can. A small bent print I'd spent 3 evenings restoring. Filling a crack across the edge with tissue so fine you could read through it. It showed a barefoot girl of about 7 sitting on wooden porch steps. I thought it was my mother as a child. I thought she'd want it. She opened the card. She didn't look at the stitching or the marbling. She looked at the photograph 2 full seconds longer than a person looks at something they don't care about, and her face went the color of the napkins. Then she carried the whole thing to the kitchen and dropped it in the trash on top of the coffee grounds. Nobody moved. She came back, picked up her water glass, and said in her pleasant garden club voice that the best gift I could give her would be to disappear from this family. Then go on now before you ruin the mood. 11 people looked at their plates. Wren started crying. I got my coat and I walked out. I didn't run, whatever the neighbors say now. I was maybe 6 houses down Willowmere when a car slowed behind me. By July, half the town swore it was a limousine. It wasn't. It was an old black town car with a cracked bumper and a magnetic sign on the door that read Bexley Car Service. The back door opened, and a woman got out with a cane and a canvas tote, wearing a cardigan in 90-degree heat, the way people do when they've lived somewhere warm a long time. Her name was Opal Winter. She was 84. She was my client, and I'd texted her my mother's address that morning by mistake, never expecting her to actually use it. My mother came out onto the porch to handle the stranger the way she handles everything, chin up, hands folded. Opal squinted into the sun, tilted her head and said in a perfectly friendly voice, "Sandy, Sandy Doss." My mother sat down hard on the top step. Her shoulder hit the railing. The screen door banged twice against the frame, and Renee started screaming for Derek to call someone. They took her 40 minutes to the hospital in Louisville. I followed in my own car. In the waiting room, Renee filled out the paperwork and wrote her name and Derek's in the contact boxes. I said nothing, because there's a kind of nothing that's louder than words. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was almost anticlimactic. She'd fainted from low blood pressure, dehydration, standing too long in the sun. They gave her fluids and sent her home that night. But through the glass of the exam room door, I watched her open her eyes, look straight at me and turn her head away. And I heard her ask the nurse one question before she asked anything about her own heart. She asked if that woman was still outside. If you think that was the strangest part of my year, you're wrong. That was only the beginning. My shop, the Bound Page, sits on Larch Street with my apartment above it. I've rebound family Bibles, flattened 40-year-old wedding certificates pulled from flooded basements, saved quilts sewn from feed sacks. Ordinary people bring me ordinary things and cry in my front room about once a week. Opal Winter came in that Thursday and told me flatly she hadn't meant to cause a scene in a stranger's yard. She's not a wealthy woman, whatever the town decided afterward. She managed a school cafeteria for 29 years in Bradenton, Florida. Her son pays for the car service because she gave up driving years ago. What she'd brought me was 2 boxes of letters, 3 household ledgers spanning the 1960s and 70s, and a photo album with loosening corner mounts, all pulled from her family's old home in Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, where they'd run Harvorson's Dry Goods until it closed in 1989. She wanted it preserved before she died, so her son wouldn't just throw it out. At the door, almost as an afterthought, she said, "Your mother and I go back further than she'd like." I asked what she meant. She just asked whether the album should be rehoused or left in its original binding, and let the moment close. Here's what my year looked like on paper. Millbrook was turning 200 that September, and the Heritage Committee, chaired by my mother, had voted to have me conserve the 1889 church record book for the bicentennial, under glass, for $11,000. That was over 40% of what my shop grossed the year before. I'd already ordered the display case. 10 days after Mother's Day, my mother called for the first time since the porch. Not to ask if I was okay. She told me the house was going on the market, a stager was coming Wednesday, and the estate company would be pricing the contents. I asked for one thing, my father's workbench, hard maple, 5 feet long, 30 years of knife marks across the top like a map of everything he'd ever built. She said the bench went with the house. I need to tell you about 2003 because nothing after this makes sense without it. I was 10. I made my mother a photo album with a hole punch and kitchen twine, glued in photographs of the 4 of us, wrote captions in pencil. It took a month. My sister gave her perfume our father had paid for. My mother thanked Renee by her full name, held the album and said she'd put it somewhere safe. In July I found it in the garage trash can, swollen with rainwater. I pressed it flat under a dictionary for 6 weeks and never said a word to anyone. I put it in a shoebox on my closet shelf. That shoebox eventually became a grey archival box that followed me through every apartment I've ever had. It took me 23 years to understand I wasn't repairing things up there. I was filing an appeal. I worked on Opal's collection at night. It was slow, careful, ordinary history, hardware orders, a leaking roof, a condolence note after a neighbor's death. Then, near the back of a 1972 ledger under a column headed, "Help," one surname caught in my chest and wouldn't come loose. I couldn't say why yet. I closed the book, logged the date, and went to bed. It took 19 more days to find out. Then Darlene Combs, who runs the committee's purse strings, called me on a Tuesday morning. Sweet as tea, using my name 4 times in 90 seconds. The committee had reconsidered. They'd found an out-of-state firm that could do the record book cheaper. When I asked gently if anything had come up about me, she laughed and said, "Well, honey, you know how a small town is." That was the entire execution, $11,000 gone. And nobody ever had to say an accusation out loud. If you've ever lost work over a phone call nobody will admit to making, you already know exactly how that morning felt. But what came next is the part I still can't fully explain to anyone who hasn't lived in a town of 4,000 people. I drove out to say one last goodbye to the workbench. The house didn't look like my mother's house anymore, white slipcovers, a bowl of fake lemons, every family photo pulled off the walls. My sister met me at the door in a real estate blazer and told me the bench was listed as a built-in, and built-ins convey with the sale. While we argued, Ren came down the stairs and pressed something into my hand, the Mother's Day card, folded against the grain, coffee-stained. She'd pulled it out of the trash after everyone left and hidden it for 6 weeks. My father built that bench with a secret drawer only I knew about, pushed the left end of the front trim, and a shallow drawer slides out. When I was little, he kept butterscotch candy in it. I got down on the garage floor and pushed. It still worked. Inside was a carpenter's pencil, an old shop notebook, and a sealed business envelope with 3 letters written on the front in his handwriting. S-DOS. My father died in 2012, a heart attack at 51, and I've spent every year since thinking he was the good one. I told my sister there was nothing out here but sawdust. It was the first lie I ever told her, and it took me 33 years to tell my first one, and about 4 seconds for her to tell hers back to me later. It was almost 1 in the morning when I finally put Opal's loose photographs under the light. One print sat face down beside an empty album mount, dated in pencil, summer 1972. I turned it over. A wide wooden porch, 3 adults on the steps and off to the side, half out of frame. A barefoot girl of about 7 with her arms around her knees. I've looked at that chin across a dinner table for 33 years. It belonged to my mother. It was the same porch, the same steps, the same screen door as the little bent photograph I'd cleaned and given her on Mother's Day. Then I opened the 1972 ledger to that column headed Help and ran my finger down it. There it was, entered every week for 4 years, DOS, R, kitchen and laundry, $9 a week. My hands were steady, which surprised me. But I don't get to announce conclusions in my line of work just because something looks a certain way at 1 in the morning. So the next Monday I drove 3.5 hours to Cedar Hollow and sat in the public library the moment it opened. City directories, church rolls, a class photo binder with a broken spine. 2 hours in I found her. Sandra Lynn Doss, born 1965, mother Ruth Doss, occupation of household head listed as domestic, address of record, the rear room of the Harvorson residence. There was no Sandra listed as a Harvorson daughter ever, and I learned something I hadn't expected: the Harvorsons weren't rich. Their store closed owing money to 2 suppliers. What they had was a name people said with a little respect in it. That's all my mother ever took, not money, a little respect. The cemetery sat on a rise behind a chain-link fence. In the back row, flat to the ground, Doss, Ruth M., 1928-1991. Nothing else. No verse, no husband's name beside her. I sat down in the grass because my legs gave out. At the cemetery office, a woman with a green ledger showed me who'd paid for the marker. Set later than the burial, $260, November 1992, Section D. The signature on the line, in the handwriting that used to write my school absence notes, read, W. Ferris. My father's sealed envelope when I finally opened it with a bone folder held 3 things. A photocopy of a 1987 marriage license application with a name typed, crossed out and retyped. Sandra Lynn Doss. A photograph of a heavyset woman in a house dress, unsmiling, in a yard with a wash basket. And a scrap of shop paper in my father's block printing, told her a name is just a handle. Told her I'd carry it, he knew. Before he married her he knew, and he decided it didn't matter. He carried it right up until the point where it stopped being hers to ask for. He paid for a marker with no verse, drove home, read me a bedtime story, and never once told me I had a grandmother. The best gift would be if you disappeared from this family. My mother said that to me in a kitchen in May. Sitting at my bench that night, I understood I wasn't the first person in my family it had been said to. It had just been said to Ruth Doss first, quietly with a check by a kind man. My phone buzzed. My mother for the first time in 4 months. I called a colleague in Florida before I called her back and asked a hypothetical she saw through instantly. The rule in my field is simple: the collection belongs to the owner. You don't remove items. You don't disclose contents to a third party. You return everything exactly as you found it, and what the owner does with their own history afterward is not your business. That rule is right. It just doesn't cover what to do when the owner is 84 and alone, and the third party is your mother. When I called her back, she didn't ask what I knew. She said, Thursday, 4 o'clock, come to the house. That told me everything. You don't set a meeting to find out if someone knows something. She already knew. The kitchen was down to a table and 2 chairs by then. She poured tea and for the only time in my life told me the truth. 11 straight minutes, flat as a grocery list. A pantry off the Harvorson kitchen, where she ate standing up until she was 15. Her mother's hands splitting open from bleach water in winter. $9 a week and a paper sack of leftovers on Fridays. A wool coat at 11 years old with another girl's name sewn into the collar, which she wore 3 winters anyway. She didn't tell it like it was sad. She told it like a woman explaining why she keeps a spare tire. Then she said, People decide what you're worth in the first 10 seconds by what's on the table. I know that better than anybody alive. She looked at me over her glasses, and I'm not going back there for you. Then she slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $11,000, made out to my shop, the exact amount the committee had pulled. And a note in her handwriting listing 3 items: the 1972 photograph, the ledger page, a 1974 letter. "Those 3 items don't need to go back," she said, calm as anything. In exchange, the heritage contract reconsidered, the workbench delivered to my door, and a seat at the Thanksgiving table. All I had to do was quietly withhold 3 pieces of paper from an 84-year-old woman who'd never know they existed. I picked up the envelope, and God help me I didn't say no. At 2 in the morning, I put on gloves and lifted that 1972 photograph out onto my light table, alone, the way you set something aside once you've decided about it. It sat there 10 minutes while I thought about the check, about my employees' wages, about my father's bench sitting in that garage waiting to be sold to a stranger, about a name card at Thanksgiving in my mother's handwriting. Nobody would ever know, that part was true. Then I thought about a flat granite marker with no verse, behind a chain-link fence, and I understood that if those papers disappeared, Ruth Doss would stop existing anywhere on Earth except a cemetery ledger. I put the photograph back in its mount. I wrote one honest line in the report. I didn't tear up the check, I clipped it in the folder, but I didn't destroy anything either. I went to bed and didn't sleep. If somebody ever offers you your whole life back for one small dishonest thing, I understand the pull. For 10 minutes I was going to take it. What changed things wasn't me. It was what happened 4 days later, when it stopped being my choice alone. My sister came to the shop with a waiver for me to sign, disclaiming any interest in the house contents. I realized, watching her hold out the pen, that she wasn't protecting our mother. She had payments riding on that sale, and a necklace to keep. I told her I wasn't signing anything that day. Then the rumors started. No accusation, no police report, just a sentence drifting around town that things had gone missing, after that Sunday in May, said with a little shrug. Within 3 weeks I'd lost a Bible rebinding, a quilt job, a christening gown commission. I sent a certified letter to the committee with a full inventory and my insurance records. Nobody answered. You cannot defend yourself against a rumor, there's no room to walk into. The collection was due back to Opal on a Friday. I packed it exactly as I should have from the start. Every item interleaved and boxed, 14 pages of condition report, the 1972 photograph back in its rightful place, no flags, no notes. No arrows pointing anywhere. I didn't curate her family's history for her, or against my mother. I shipped it insured, and on my way out of the post office, I dropped the check into a plain envelope addressed to my mother, no note at all. 33 years of quietly fixing things for that family ended at a counter that smelled like packing tape, and nobody clapped. Opal called 9 days later. She'd read her mother's handwriting with a magnifying glass and cried over a receipt for a coffin. Then she went quiet and said, "I found the picture off the back porch. I remember that child." We fed her out there and thought we were being kind. She wasn't angry at my mother, she was ashamed of her own family, at 84, on the phone with a stranger. She'd seen in the town paper that my mother was being honored at the bicentennial supper that September. "I could come up," she said. "I'll stand up and say who she is." I told her I'd call her back. I didn't for 6 days. In those 6 days, 3 more clients quietly disappeared. I couldn't make payroll and pay for materials in the same month, so I let my assistant Nadia go. She cleaned out her drawer in about 4 minutes and hugged me on her way out, which was somehow worse than if she'd yelled. At the door she looked up at the grey archival box on my top shelf and asked what was in it. I finally told someone the truth, 31 years of things my family threw away. She asked the only question in this whole story that actually mattered. "Why are you keeping it for them?" On the 1st of September, I took the box down and opened it for the first time in 11 years. I worked 31 hours out of the next 40, flattening a construction paper album, mending a rain-damaged crayon drawing of a horse, rejoining a family photo someone had once cut me out of with kitchen scissors, using tissue so fine the seam disappears, unless you tip it to the light. Report cards, a paper turkey traced around my hand, a valentine. I sewed it all into one book, bound in navy blue cloth because of a coat with the marbled Mother's Day card, coffee stain and all as the final page. No title. No writing anywhere inside it. Just the objects in order. The bicentennial supper was held in the church fellowship hall, folding tables, foil pans of chicken. A routed wooden sign by the door reading, Founding Families. My mother's family name painted in gold near the top. I walked in at 6:20 with Opal on my arm. 40 people stopped chewing at once. I got Opal settled near the side door, and when the committee chair reached the part of her introduction about tireless service, I walked up the center aisle. I know what the whole room expected. I could have burned my mother down in 4 sentences, with an eyewitness sitting right there. Instead, I set a sealed envelope down beside her plate and said, quiet enough that only the head table heard it, "This is yours. It's the only copy there is. Nobody's read it and nobody's going to." She didn't touch it. Something crossed her face I'd never seen there in 33 years. Then she stood up too fast, knocked over her tea, and her composure came apart in front of 40 people. She said things had gone missing from her house. That I'd never been well since my father died, that I'd always been jealous of my sister. I let her run out of air, then I said, "You told me the best gift would be if I disappeared from this family." I did. I took everything you threw out with me. I opened the book on the table between the green beans and the spilled tea and turned the pages slowly enough for the whole room to see. No writing anywhere. Just a rain-damaged horse drawing, a twine-bound album with photographs glued in crooked, a family portrait with a mended seam where someone had once been cut out and put back. A marbled card with a coffee stain. I said, everything in this book was thrown away, that's how you know what it's worth. And then, somebody has to decide what's worth keeping, I've decided. It isn't you and it isn't this town, it's me. And I'm done keeping it for you. That's when my sister spoke up from the dessert table, her voice cracking, and said there was a receipt in the kitchen drawer back home. My mother had sold the necklace back to the jeweler in June for less than half what she paid. Then told the whole town it had gone missing. The room turned over in about 4 seconds. Being cleared in public isn't something you do, it's something that happens to you. I stood there while it happened, and I understood my mother would believe for the rest of her life that I'd staged the whole thing. I got my name back and lost her in the same breath. Nobody in Millbrook ever apologized to me, and stories that end with an apologetic town are usually lying to you. But the committee did quietly call in November and offer me the record book job again, for $1,600 less than the original quote. That's what winning looks like at 33, the same job for less money. The house sold under asking in October. My mother moved to a condo 2 counties over and stepped down from the committee. She tells her own version of that September now and some people believe it. She hasn't called me since. I don't think she will. 3 weeks after the supper, a flatbed truck pulled up outside my shop with no note and no name on the paperwork but the movers, and set my father's workbench down on the sidewalk. I've worked at it every single day since. There's a knife cut in the front corner from 1996, and I put my coffee cup right over it every morning. Opal mailed me the 1972 photograph, formally released in writing, because she said it ought to live with someone who knows how to keep a thing. My sister filed to separate her finances from her husband's, not her marriage, and started texting me on Sunday nights. Neither of us pretends anything's fixed. And in October, I finally broke that empty grey archival box down flat and carried it out to the recycling bin. 33 years old, and that was the first thing I ever let myself throw away. Since January, my shop's been open the first Saturday of every month free, for anyone who brings in one thing somebody once threw away. A man brought a letter he'd mailed home from basic training in 1988. A woman brought half a torn wedding photo and didn't explain, and I didn't ask. In January, my sister brought Ren in with a drawing torn straight down the middle. I didn't fix it for her. I put a needle in her hand and showed her how to sew the fold herself. She wanted to know how you tell if something's worth saving. I told her the truth. Nobody hands you that answer. You have to give it to yourself. That's my story. 1 card in the trash. 1 name that was never really hers, and a box I finally set down for good. If somebody in your family has ever measured you by what your gift cost, I hope this told you something you needed to hear. You don't have to keep filing the appeal forever. So tell me, what would you have done in that kitchen? Would you have kept the $11,000 or done what I did? Let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from tonight. If this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with the person you were thinking about the whole time you were watching. I'll see you in the next one.